Hello and welcome to You Talk. I'm your host, Ryan Funk. You Talk is a program dedicated to diversity, highlighting native-born and new Canadians' cultures and experiences. You don't have to change where you come from or your beliefs to succeed. For leader of the Manitoba New Democratic Party, Wab Kinew, his experiences and Indigenous background are some of his strengths. Prior to his political career, Kinew was a writer, journalist, and even dabbled in music. He feels incredibly blessed and honored for his current role as representative of Fort Rouge.
Well, I've always been the type of person to have an opinion, as I'm sure many of your listeners are kind of the same way. And, for a while, my friends would always tease me, "Oh, why don't you write a letter on that?" They would say. And then one day I actually did. And I wrote a letter to the editor of the Winnipeg Free Press about Team Canada's hockey team, of all things. And they ran that. And a short time later, maybe a month or two later, someone at the CBC reached out and said, "Hey, do you want to turn that into something for the radio?" So I did. And then using that foot in the door, I managed to work my way up through some of the radio ranks and then moved over to TV. And then I started working on some different projects, both in Canada and in the States, not just with that network, but with other networks, particularly in the States, working with another network down there. And then along the way, a lot of broadcasting, TV, radio work, it is about writing. And it's about, researching and putting your thoughts together in written form before you present it publicly. And so I worked on my storytelling chops there, and then eventually had an opportunity to get an introduction to the publishing world and was asked to write a book. And so I wrote my first book, The Reason You Walk, which was sort of a meditation on my father's experience in residential schools, how the intergenerational impacts played out in our family, and then kind of what does the overall experience of reconciliation have to reveal about the human condition and about our country at this time. And yeah, it's just been an amazing addition to my life, so that right now writing is my outlet. I do the political thing that consumes a huge amount of my time and energy, but my outlet, like the thing that I do for fun or to process how I'm feeling about something, or just even, just to have a bit of time to myself, is I write.
No, I get that completely. It's just you need something creative in order to get your mind off of just work and reality for a moment, just
That's right.
to escape. So you mentioned you wrote about hockey before. You consider yourself a hockey fan?
Yeah, I'd say I'm a hockey guy. Not very good at it, but I'm better at politics than I am at hockey, I would say. So yeah, that's probably reassuring for most people if they've ever seen me at Canlan or skating around with my kids. But hockey was a big part of my life growing up, and I felt like it was really good for me to be a part of that. And so I worked hard to try and make hockey like a good part of my kids' lives as they're growing up. And so helping them out both by skating and having fun, but also coaching their teams quite a bit over the years. So yeah, we're a hockey family, and that's definitely a big part of our lives.
You seem very creatively focused and inspired. So why politics? They just seem like two very different things.
That's an interesting way to put it. Well, I think one thing is I would say that I try and bring a creative energy to politics, both in terms of being energetic and enthusiastic with reaching out to people and trying to find new ways to bring people's ideas forward into the work I do at the legislature. And then also just in terms of how I communicate, whether it's recording videos for social media or making comments in the media, or whether we're putting together even advertising or stuff that we do in the community. I do try and bring a creative approach to that. And in some ways, I think all the different things that I did in the past really helped to prepare me to talk to people in politics. Like the broadcasting stuff definitely helped me to figure out how to communicate a message and to talk to people. The creative stuff that I've done over the years, I think, has given me maybe the chance to innovate in some ways and to think about even policy ideas in newer ways and be open to new ideas. So, and then just generally life experience. everyone that I've met along the way and had a conversation with, I think has probably helped to influence the way that I think about policy ideas and the way that I think about, how are we going to solve climate change? How can we improve healthcare? How can we keep people healthier in the community? How can we innovate and also at the same time guarantee quality in the education system? I think that it's all worked together, and like one has led to the other. And so maybe it was a non-traditional approach to politics. Like I didn't start with the campus political association and work my way up from there, right? Like I went out and I had an interesting bunch of different careers and then eventually found my way into politics. But I think it's good. Like I think it's good when people are in politics and they've had different life experiences, because often young people in particular, I think, get turned off when it seems like all the politicians are the same and it's just the same tired approach. And hopefully, my team and I having, not just cultural representation and geographic representation, the fact that we also represent a bunch of different life experiences, hopefully that makes us better leaders too.
Mm-hmm. And is that why you went into the NDP party? You feel that kind of your experiences, background, and kind of the ideas that you want to accomplish are better represented within the NDP party?
I think so. To me, the NDP is about getting things done. From a progressive perspective, we're definitely coming from a progressive perspective, but it's also about getting things done, like actually making things happen. And when I look back over the years, whether it was my dad fighting racism in, Kenora back in the day when there was, coming out of residential schools and dealing with some of the segregation, who is his ally back in those fights? Well, it was Stephen Lewis from the Ontario NDP. Or whether it was my wife's family, my in-laws, and who helped them to lift themselves out of poverty. Well, it was Howard Pauley and the NDP of the 1980s in Manitoba, who made a program where people from poverty, the Access program, could get to post-secondary, could get to university. And I just looked and I said, well, you look at a lot of the people that I know who have success, they achieved it themselves, but in some ways they found support from the NDP. And so I thought, yeah, that seems like a good place. Plus, I'm a progressive person, especially when it comes to like the environment and certain social issues and income inequality. And I view like the NDP is the progressive voice. So it was a natural inclination.
Mm-hmm. How about we talk a little bit about that? You're mentioning that your father had to deal with racism, and it talks about residential schools. How about we talk a little bit about your connection to your Indigenous heritage?
For us, like speaking about my family, like that's who we are. We practice Anishinaabe culture and we eat cheeseburgers. You know what I mean? Like that's what we do. It's just natural. So for me, I think part of the reason why I am able to be involved in politics and to have a career that takes up, a huge amount of my time and energy is the fact that my family has my back. And the way that my family has my back is us being grounded in our culture. So for us, we pray before we eat together, and we pray in Ojibwe. We pray in the Anishinaabe language. Each summer, our big annual family trip isn't necessarily a vacation. It's a trip to a Sundance where we go and live like our ancestors did and practice our traditional ceremonies. And throughout the year, we participate in powwows and other cultural activities as well. So for me, I actually find nourishment from that. I find it very nourishing and energizing. And then that allows me to come back and do the political thing with more, almost like a reset, right? Like a recharged battery, so to speak. So for me, I based on who I am, I don't know that I could do politics if I wasn't able to maintain my connection to our culture, because it is, it's if writing is my outlet, then the culture is the conduit that I find energy and inspiration from a lot of the time.
Oh, that's really nice. I like that. I mean, you hear a lot of people when they they find success or they get really involved in their jobs. Sometimes they forget who they are and they kind of get distracted and caught in the moment.
Yeah, no, and I'd be cautious of that too. But you raised my dad there. One of the things that he did tell me, like when I first started finding some career success, and this was long before politics, I was doing media at the time, and I started just telling him like, well, these different opportunities are happening for me. I'm not too sure how I'm going to, stay humble as I go through this. And he was telling me, well, just use the pipe, use the culture, use those things that you're involved in, and that will keep you humble. So it's always something that I've tried to keep in mind, something that I want to maintain.
So why don't we talk a little bit more about the you're talking about you go to powwows, you pray in Anishinaabe. Oh, God. Sorry, I can't say that.
Anishinaabe, yeah. You're almost there.
Almost there.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about your culture and just your connections to it, and just life, and just how your own experiences versus your father's, and how they've kind of changed over the years.
Well, I think our culture is really, it's grounded in a few things. One is a connection to the land and having a relationship with the land in terms of, we come from this place on earth, whether it's, Manitoba, Lake of the Woods, Northwestern Ontario, going down into the States a bit. Those are sort of some of the Anishinaabe homelands. But also just that we have a relationship to one another and to the world around us too. And the fact that, there is this view in our culture that human beings are sort of the most humble of all things, in the sense that we depend on the existence of everything else, the animal world, all plant life, the geography of where we live, water, everything. We're very almost precarious in the sense that if all those other things aren't there around us, then we might not be able to enjoy the lives that we have. So there's always that kind of humility that's really important in the culture. And then another thing is just this, it's a different way of looking at the world around you. Like there's a saying, it's almost like a bumper sticker kind of saying, but it is true in the culture that there's a saying that we don't own the land owns us. And so it's just like a different sort of relationship. And I think a lot of the other cultural values come from some of those insights. So it is more about relationships and about trying to stay humble and trying to stay grounded to the place that you come from, the community that you come from. And so in terms of how did that play out in our family, well, I think it was really important that we were able to hand that down from the previous generation, my father's generation, aunts and uncles, my mom and everybody, to me. And then also that I'm able to introduce that to my kids, because then it gives them an identity and a way to relate to who they are in this part of the world.
Mm-hmm. How do you think kind of those morals and ideologies, how do you think those can translate into, people living a city lifestyle? What can we kind of learn from that?
Well, I think there's a lot, right? Like if we're in this time of climate change and we're trying to solve the climate crisis, I think the idea that we don't own the land owns us. If we meditate on that and figure out how to apply that on a day-to-day level, it might offer us some solutions, right? Just as one example. And similarly too, the idea that we're all very interconnected and that our fortunes, if you will, are tied up with those of the other people and beings around us, and that probably gives us a different outlet on things like or a different outlook, on things like income inequality and like even the pandemic. I think Indigenous culture sometimes offers a different worldview on things. Like I noticed one, not here in Canada but in the States, there's an Indigenous nation, the Cherokee, and what they did with their vaccines when they first got them, the first people they vaccinated were their Cherokee language speakers, because they wanted to protect their cultural identity. And now I'm not saying that's 100% what we should do here in Manitoba. I think there's a lot of good in the way they're being rolled out in Manitoba in terms of who's going to be prioritized. Definitely there's major problems in terms of how many vaccines are getting out the door. But just the idea that there might be different ways of thinking about what do we value in our society? I thought that was an interesting insight into what does that society value, right? And then if we looked here in Manitoba, what do we value? Certainly we value seniors and elders and young people, but there might be other things that we want to add to the list too.
Mm-hmm. Talking about protecting the language, statistically and unfortunately, a lot of these Indigenous cultures and languages are dying out. What can we do to help preserve them? And for people, not within the culture, how can we better learn about it and help those within the culture help preserve it?
Well, I think the universities are actually a site of a lot of that important work. And, some of those statistics are pretty grim, but there is good news. Like, I think years ago, they used to say only three Indigenous languages, Ojibwe, Cree, and Inuktitut, were going to survive for the next 100 years. But I think that that's changed, and there's now more languages in that group because of the work that people in post-secondaries and in community have been doing to revitalize languages. So I think, one thing is, to take an Indigenous language class, whether you're Indigenous or not, I think is one way to help just make that, one, you learn the language a bit and then you can use it and, help explain it and the importance to other people. But two, you also send a message to the university administration through your enrollment that that's an important program that you value. And then the other thing is I would just, especially in Canada and in this part of Manitoba, I would just encourage people to think about like the places where we live and the terms that we use. Like a lot of those have Indigenous origins, like Winnipeg, for instance. It's an Ojibwe word. Manitoba, it's an Ojibwe sentence. Canada, right? Like these are all words from Indigenous languages. And so whether or not you have Indigenous blood, by being a Winnipegger or a Manitoban or a Canadian, some part of your identity has been influenced by Indigenous languages. So they are worth saving, and they are worth protecting, and they are worth fighting for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. Kind of going back into your job in politics, how do you connect with your constituents? Well, you represent a wide swath of people. How do you connect to them? How do you know what's important to them?
Well, definitely, the issues that people bring to me are an important part of what I bring forward in public and at the legislature and in the media. So I represent a pretty cool, pretty progressive area where there are a lot of people who prioritize fighting climate change and who want us to build a more equitable society. And then at the same time, like there's a lot of folks in my area who just have more everyday concerns, like how are they going to keep their head above water, pay the next hydro bill, etc., things like that. So I always try and listen to those concerns so that I can represent to the best extent possible what's actually going on. I think in pre-COVID times, if we could call it that was pretty straightforward. It would be times. Like the before times. There you go. It was like I would host town hall meetings, whether that's in a church basement or, even in my office or a community center. We would go knock on doors. We would do like phoning, canvassing. That's obviously much more different. That's changed, I should say, now. Now we're doing Zoom town halls. We're still doing phoning, but the canvassing isn't really there, which to me, that's one of the best ways because you can't really cherry pick who you're going to encounter when you're knocking on doors, right? With Zoom, it's useful, but probably just the people who are interested in whatever topic I'm talking about that day, they're going to show up for the Zoom town hall, right? Whereas if we're canvassing, we might encounter different perspectives than we would otherwise here. So yeah, so we're forced to be more creative, and there's a lot more, I guess, digital outreach that's happening now compared to what was going on before. So I think part of that's challenging, like I said, but part of that's also really good because there's a lot of, digital natives, as people say, who are really adept at using technology, and that's the forum that they want to engage on. And so we're probably making it easier for those folks to get engaged.
Do you think you'll go with a more hybrid model in the future once we can actually also have these get-togethers?
Yeah, I do think so. Like we just had our NDP convention a couple weekends ago, and it was 100% virtual, which was challenging in a lot of ways. But so, for sure, I want to get back to being in a room with like, a few hundred people and just like the energy and excitement that comes with that. But at the same time, I was thinking, you know what, this is probably a lot easier for someone in rural Manitoba or northern Manitoba to participate in the sense that they don't have to pay for travel, they don't have to pay for a hotel in order to participate in this meeting. So there's definitely some elements like that. I don't have like 100% figured out how we do the hybrid thing, but I definitely think there is some value that we're going to have to continue having that digital option.
So where do you see your political career going, or just see yourself going in like 5-10 years? What do you see in your future?
Well, I think the big goal that, everyone that I work with share, like the team that I work with, is, we want to win the next election. And it's not for the sake of winning. It's because we want to create a Manitoba that works, better for more people and is more inclusive and is also more successful. So, I would like to see a Manitoba in 5 years that has like an advanced tech-oriented economy that's still probably strong in some of the areas where we are now, like agriculture and manufacturing and transportation, but also has more of an orientation towards the knowledge economy. And I'd like us to be well on our way to fighting or to achieving our goals on climate change and to fighting climate change. And I'd like to see us address a lot of the issues in healthcare and education that have been laid bare by the pandemic. So to me, I think it's really important that we win the next election. And I do think the next election is going to be one of the most important provincial elections in our lifetime, because we've seen through the pandemic what happens when you have a conservative government in charge. And it's been very damaging. Like the pandemic itself has been very damaging to people, but the mishandling of the government in not preparing for the second wave of the pandemic, or cutting jobs, or ignoring really important issues like addictions, has been very damaging to people. And I think more than anything, we've seen when we have an approach that's just trying to cut costs or just trying to cut corners, what they actually do is they cut resilience from our economy. They cut resilience from our education system and resilience from our social systems. And we need those things, because if there's ever a crisis like the pandemic, we need to be able to bounce back. We need a shock-proof public system. For healthcare, we need a shock-proof economy. And on the flip side, in terms of the upside, if we build a resilient system that's able to, respond and react to what's going on quickly and to be nimble, then I think that that's actually going to position us for success in the future. So we got a lot of the building blocks for success in Manitoba. Like, we have a low carbon electricity grid. We got a really diverse and interesting population with a ton of know-how and a ton of potential. And what we need, I think, are just some smart investments and decisions at the provincial level to help unlock all that potential, address some of the long-standing issues that we've always faced in Manitoba, hopefully, but also to just really set our province up for success. So that's what I'd really like to see happen, is for us to have a chance to make those changes, and hopefully we can make Manitoba an even better place to live in that 5, 10, 15-year timeline you're talking about.
If you have any stories you'd like us to share or communities we should highlight, leave a comment on our social media or reach out to us on our website. I'm Ryan Funk. This was You Talk, and have yourself a good one.